Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Serafina Nova Glass. Serafina is an Edgar Award nominated author. Her book, On a Quiet Street, was named a New York Times Book Review Summer Read and an Amazon editor's pick in mysteries and thrillers, among other praise. She recently sold the film rights to Mar Vista Entertainment for a limited series. She's just completed, she's just releasing Nothing Ever Happens Here, which is her sixth novel. We're having a little trouble with math this morning. And she is currently actually at work on her eighth novel, having just turned in her seventh novel. So she's a very busy, busy lady. She's also an assistant professor and playwright in residence at the University of Texas, Arlington. Publishers Weekly has named her a writer to watch. Welcome, Serafina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so fun to have you. I was telling Serafina before we started recording that I gobbled Nothing Ever Happens Here. This is my weekend. I was in Denver and I missed my flight. One flight was delayed a day, so I had a lot of time to read, and I was grateful to have a fabulous book. So tell our listeners and watchers a little bit about Nothing Ever Happens Here.
So it's set in northern Minnesota, and I'm from Minnesota. If you can't tell, sometimes they'll always give me away. But and I had never set a book there before, and so I think what really sort of drove me to sort of start conceiving of this idea was I really like in the Vacancy Room 10, I sort of established a community of people, and I'm starting to realize that I really sort of like these small communities. I don't know, maybe I need something set in a dorm room at some point. But this it is partially set at like a senior citizens home, a care home where 5 elderly folks sort of get themselves overly involved in solving a mystery that's happening in town. And similar to the Vacancy in Room 10, where they were in a motel setting with very, very close neighbors, there's something really fun about exploring that small knit community. So that's kind of where it started, and it's hard to talk about this one without giving spoilers away. So that's my summary.
That's right. Well, right. There was an incident at a cafe years ago where a woman who wasn't the owner of the cafe ended up sort of trapped in a freezer and almost died, but she got away, and then the whole thing comes back. And something is right. I always like to say everything goes sideways because I feel like in all
Yes.
great books, right? It all you start out like everything's great. She just runs in, her twins are in the car. I can imagine nothing more terrifying, of course, than that initial moment where she's in the cafe and there's a man in there and she's thinking of her kids in the car. So anyway, beautifully set up, and it is super fun that there's the two sort of main characters, and then there's this sort of like there's a third character who's part of the care home, and I love how the older generation gets involved. So tell us, sounds like the inspiration came a little bit from kind of coming back to your roots, but was there a seed for the actual story? I know sometimes they come from a place and sometimes they don't. So, how can you tell us a little bit about this one?
I feel like my answer to that is almost never comes from a place. I'm sure you get asked too, like where do you get your ideas? And I get asked that so much, and I just never have an answer for it. Nothing comes by divine, sort of intervention or falls into my lap. I get really sort of anxious about trying to know that, I got 3 more books to write to fulfill this next contract, and I don't even have any idea what the next book will be about. It doesn't, I don't know. I'm never just struck with inspiration. I really have to think a lot about plot, a lot about character development, who these people are, throw a lot of rocks at them to see sort of how they're going to dodge and pivot. And so I think sometimes I start with setting as a character, and I really want to immerse myself in a very atmospheric world that I get to live in for a while too.
Yeah.
And then kind of maybe have that inciting incident and sort of just explore. Well, I don't explore as I write, as if you've ever, I'm interviewed and I always say I'm a big outliner, but sort of explore through the pre-writing process where that inciting incident will take us. And, ask questions. If this happened, what would I do? What would happen next?
Right.
And sort of, I guess that's my initial answer to how ideas are generated. It's a laborsome process.
I love the idea that you're not somebody who has like 19 ideas. I feel like I am also not someone who has 19 ideas. I'm lucky if I have one idea that I am pursuing with every book. And at the end of the book, I'm always like, that's it. I just wrote the last book I'll ever write. I
I
don't have
know.
And then, something happens or whatever, and you're like, huh, what if? So, you're not alone. I'm not an outliner, and I love that idea too, but that does unfortunately not work for me. But it is,
Oh, see, that's fascinating. Fascinating to me when I meet someone who's not an outliner. I admire it. I don't know. I don't understand it. But I think it's fantastic. I
I
think it
mean,
seems like how exciting to just sit down and wonder what's going to happen. I got to know. I can't do that.
well, I think unfortunately, the way I discovered is by going the wrong way in any one direction. So while you're doing the same thing probably by outlining, I actually have to sort of write it. And I mean, talk about labor. I end up, a third of the book usually goes away in one shape or another. So that's not you always think, well, there's probably a smarter way to do this, but I don't know if there is. I think there's probably a way that works, and a way that doesn't. But I love that. So we were just hearing about On a Quiet Street, which was your third book, fourth book. And that sounds like that's exciting. You've got some movie news, which is sort of what we all are like, bring on the screen. What's happening with that? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, it's again, as you know, such a long process with film rights. And I think when people hear that it's optioned, if you're not in the film space, you think, oh, when is it coming? What network is it going to
Right,
be on?
right,
No,
right.
we're gets optioned and then they try to get it set up. And so that looks a lot of different ways. Sometimes they get an actor attached or a director, a showrunner. And in this case, they do have a director signed, and they're in legal with the showrunner, and then they're doing the pitching process. So it's moved along quite a bit. It's in kind of final stages um, of getting there as far as, are we going to have a writer's room start this year, sort of a thing.
Exciting.
So yeah, it is. It's moving along really well. And so we're hopeful. And like, you just kind of try not to think about it and write the next thing and hope for good news down the line.
Right,
Because
right.
I
But
think at the beginning, it's so new and exciting. You're dwelling on it all the time. And I'm like, okay, well,
yeah,
move
you're
on.
like
And
yeah. And actually, it's nice too that's sort of out of your hands. I mean, one of the things about being an author is that when you hear news of a translation or an option for screen, it's sort of like it's exciting and it's also like there's not really much you can do about it, right? You
yeah,
just have like your job is to write the next book, and that's sort of always our job. Every book you finish, you're like, now my job is to write the next book, which feels,
right,
feels like a lot. And people are like, "Oh, what are you working on? And can I read it next week?" And you're like, "Well, technically this one will be out in 2026,
right.
that kind of thing."
Uh, and the long, long process. Yeah. And I think it's the best way to go because, I come from a background of theater and we always tell students like once you go on an audition, as soon as you walk out there, it's the next thing you're doing. You forget about it. It's out of your hands completely on to the next project. As soon as you strike the stage for a show you just finished, you can't really mourn over it. You just got to go to the next thing. And that's part of the art and that's part of the process. And so it is exciting when you're just like, doing laundry and like your publisher says, hey, you're going to translate it into Russian. And you're
Yes.
an interesting turn of events today. I was just folding socks, so it's a
Yes.
weird life kind of in a way.
It is super bizarre. Level, difficult and also wonderful. So how does, don't talk to very many authors who are also sort of in the acting space or the, playwright space. Tell us about, did one thing lead to the other? It was sort of that your original love and then you started writing or vice versa.
I kind of feel like a broken record on this, but I just didn't know anybody get traditionally published anymore. It always seemed like such a tiny elite group of people that were so unreachable and unknowable. And like, who does that happen to? There's no, you know what
Right.
I mean? It wasn't even a career path because it's not even realistic, I
Right.
guess, So would I have thought sort of in that direction a lot earlier if I known that that was even possible? Maybe. But I think I went into playwriting because I just majored in theater in college. It was kind of fun at the time, and I think I thought I wanted to be a professor. I think I knew I wanted to stay in the craft and teach and just keep doing it and not get an office job and stay kind of in that. Um, and then I was writing plays kind of at a young age, like sophomore in college. But even that, you put something on stage and 10 people come, it's very thankless, difficult.
Right.
But I think it's really, really difficult to write a play. I think it's harder than maybe to me as now writing screenplays and books than any other medium, only because it's just so hard to keep someone's attention in one setting with
Yeah.
very limited scene changes and not
Right.
any big musicals or helicopters coming down on the stage. Like it's not
Right.
Miss Saigon. You're writing,
Right.
regular sort of theater. The kind that I was involved in it was a tough gig, but I think it really set me up for exploring in different genres, all the meandering you get to do with character development and any
Right.
scene change you want at any given moment. So it felt really freeing trying to
I'll
write a book
bet.
at the time. And then of course, when you get a book deal and it's actually like becomes a job instead of a pastime, that's exciting. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
that is. So, and the teaching must be kind of a nice, I mean, a nice sort of like, again, like, so this job is so unknown and so also solitary. So the teaching probably feeds some other parts of you, because you still do that, right?
Actually, I did hear you say that I don't anymore.
Oh,
Last semester, but just a couple
yeah.
weeks ago. So
Okay.
last semester, yeah, no, it's last semester was my last term. So just early December, I finished up 10
Yeah.
years at the university.
Oh,
But
wow.
there's a lot of deadlines coming up and it's just juggling. And I was even like the last 5 years, I've only been online. I don't even go to campus.
Okay.
It was still, as far as being solitary and isolating, still that for
Yeah,
sure. I
well,
didn't have a
oh,
lot of
right.
interaction. But yeah, when this got to be as full time as it is now,
Yeah,
and I'm writing a novella for a second company. So there's like 2 books this year instead of one. One
right.
is plenty, as we all know. So um, yes, it was a great experience, and teaching is always, kind of
Yeah.
using your skills in a different way. So it was a catalyst kind of for getting me into writing fiction, but it is behind me now. So I'm
Yeah. I mean, transitions like that are, it's interesting too, because it's like a sign that your career is, growing and building. I taught at our local university. I'm in Bozeman, Montana, and I taught for a while also. And I loved it. And it used a different part of my brain, but it also requires a lot,
yeah,
you sort of have to show up with a lot more energy and ideas and plans than the students do. So, when I retired from that, I also felt like that was a great experience, and I'm sort of glad I'm done with it, right? I like to be in my pajamas because I did go to campus.
like that's the thing too. I spend a lot of time. People make fun of me walking my dog. A lot of time. We
Yeah.
live by the lake, and I listen to my audiobooks, and I walk him for an hour and a half, and he's happy as a clam down here right now. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, I get to be in my pajamas at work. I get to just walk out the front door in the middle of the day and walk my dog as long as I want. I mean, I feel so grateful to kind of be in this position and have this job where
Yeah.
I'm not checking into an
Yeah.
office every day. But on the flip side, my husband always tells me, like, I would have thrown myself out the window. Like, he could never handle. He works in medical, he's in a clinic every day, and he's social, and the isolation would be just something he could never fathom. So everyone's different. It's not for everyone for sure. But I
No.
mean, maybe you're like me, like I get to spend as much time in my pajamas in the morning as I want.
Yes. And it's
And
also, I mean, it's like you said, like there are I mean, I have hundreds of rejections. I mean, of course you still get them, which, but I mean, I'm 16 books in and I bet I have 200 rejection letters. Um, and I had for a while there, I started when you sent off your paper manuscript, and then they'd send back a form letter that said, so I actually have a xylophone folder of rejection letters, which at some point I was like, oh, I'm going to wallpaper a bathroom or something funny. I'm definitely not doing that, but it's just, and I think it's a thing that a lot of people just are like, I mean, it is so disheartening, right? You get somebody who says, oh, it's almost there, but they don't really say what's almost there about it. And
right.
so it really requires you have to be either like incredibly stubborn, I think, which is where I've come in, or just, really, you really have to persevere. And I don't know why I kept doing it when it seems
I
like
know.
the universe was saying, girlfriend, get a day job, quit. But here we are, right?
Right? So good you didn't. Yeah, I know it is, those early days of the self-doubt, and now even it's just like we're all human, and it's no matter how, exciting it is to know that you're X amount of books in and you have X amount of books in contract, feeling like staying relevant, or somebody, one bad, you get 10 good reviews and that one bad one's the one you remember, like, taking it to heart and criticism, and anybody can say whatever they want because that's the world we live in of
I like that,
social
right.
media. I think it takes sort of again a different kind of person to be able to not let that sink in and affect, sort of who you think you are as a writer. I stopped reading. My agent sort of made me, he's like, for your mental health, I kind of
Yes.
just stopped paying attention to that and stay in my little solitary bubble of writing the next thing, like we said. But yeah, it's a weird job.
It's so weird. And actually, I was just talking to Danny Palmer's a good friend of mine about this morning because he got his first 1-star review on whatever book is coming in. And I was like, how are you still reading those? Because it's not only do you have to have a really tough skin for the rejection, for the reviews, even for the stupid, pardon my French, asshole at the dinner party who says, I read your last book and I didn't love it. And you're like, dude, that is stuff you can keep to yourself. I do not need to know that, right? But on
Fiction, it's not that serious. You don't need to worry.
exactly. And
Calm
on the
down.
other side, you're expected to sort of be this like tender soul who can, bear her vulnerabilities so that you can relate to characters and that you can see things from different perspective. And that requires us to be sort of highly emotional creatures. So you have to, you have to be like super tough and also super tender. And it's like, geez,
Yeah.
it's a really kind of impossible dichotomy, right?
Yep. Which goes along with what I say all the time. What a weird job.
Yes.
Just all
What?
around. Yeah, no, that's so true. You try to, not let any of that affect you because you're in a good place with it overall. But I'm getting a lot better at that. I think before it used to be difficult, and it's like, how can I sit here and be writing the next thing when somebody just said how bad I sucked or something like that,
I
and then
know.
somebody thinks you're too great, and it gets kind of a little bit, you know,
You're like,
unnerving on
right.
the other end.
I appreciate it, but what were you smoking when you read my book? I mean, it's so true. I do feel like there's sort of this message, I also as a, author, I love supporting other authors. I feel like the universe should just know that if you hated a book, I mean, unless it was like grammatically a nightmare or they spelled the most basic things wrong, I feel like it's nice to just say, whoa, this book is not for me, and just walk past it, right?
Right.
Give great reviews on books you love, and if you hate them, then just walk away. But that isn't how the world works, and not enough people are listening to this podcast to listen.
I think I kind of thought the world did work like that because I'm not a person who ever comments on things on social media or gets in any kind of arguments ever. But I also, I used to kind of keep up with Goodreads when I was a reader before I ever wrote anything. And I had the same conviction. If I didn't like it, I think that a lot of readers don't know that maybe we see it. I don't know, but I used to see every single one every day. But I would never think to leave a bad review. I would just move on to the next one. I could leave a good
Yeah,
review. But of course,
exactly.
now I'm like, well, you're an idiot. The world doesn't work that way. That's not how most people roll. But yeah, I think part of our job, I'm learning, is just wading through how to emotionally balance all that.
Yep.
Um,
It's
and even
easier.
though, of course, like the majority of it's good, we probably wouldn't be here if it weren't. But yeah, it's hard to still kind of.
Well, that's the other thing is like sometimes the books that perform the absolute best are the ones like with 3.5 stars because it's like people either hate it or they love it. And that gives people. So I often try to tell, friends and myself, like, hey, it's okay to have some 1-star reviews because then maybe there's some people who are like, well, wait, why did somebody hate that and somebody love it? Maybe
I
I need.
want to know, so I'm gonna get.
That's that is probably
True.
true fiction, Serafina, but that's what I tell myself. I'm like, oh, they're gonna have to read it now because they don't know if they're gonna love it or hate it. So yeah, it is just a weird, like you said, it's just a super, super weird job. But it is
I
also,
find that the books that I've loved to write the most are the weirdest. The characters are weird instead of just sort of like your average middle class 30 something.
yeah,
So the ones that I've been really emotionally connected to, like this new one that's coming out, don't tend to do as well as the ones that are a little bit more straight-laced, upper middle class, 30 something, white women kind of a thing.
interesting.
And then
Yeah.
those seem to soar. And then these quirky, crazy asses at a motel that are just doing bizarre stuff. I mean, I get it, it's maybe not super relatable, but gosh, was it fun to write, sort of
Yeah,
more so
and
than the other stuff. And it doesn't balance out that way when it hits market, I don't think all the time.
well, and we read enough about the sort of like average people, right? I think it's fun to read about, and it's fun to explore. Like, when you're doing this, you're in, there's 3 points of view in the book, right? We have the two, it's Shelby and Mac, and then what's the older woman's name?
Lawrence.
Yeah, so it's like they were in those, and each one of them has got a very different perspective on the world, right? She's in a different position. One of them has a grown daughter, one of them has twins, who are younger, and one of them's obviously an older woman, who's living in this home, and I think it's fun to sort of stand into those shoes and walk around a while, which is why I think reading is, if everybody read. I think the world would be a kinder, gentler place because it's an opportunity, right? To see something from somebody else's point of view. And I don't think we get enough of that anywhere else, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And to be able to explore those characters, I mean, sometimes when I'm writing like On a Quiet Street or the new one that I just finished is a lot more like On a Quiet Street, the one that not this one, but the one after book 7. And they become maybe a little bit too similar to each other and sort of the character I've written before. And I feel like in Nothing Ever Happens Here, Herb is probably my favorite character in the book. And he's, a supporting character, but he's the
Yes.
guy who's going to like smoke a cigar in like shorts and socks and sandals and sub-zero weather and like
Right.
always handing out snacks, always cracking a joke. He's just this guy that I can totally picture
Yes.
and fall in love with. But yeah, I mean, again, he's not like the most super relatable, my demographic reader. This guy isn't
Yeah.
isn't the guy that they're gonna picture themselves as. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting. You'd think the things that like, oh, if you're authentic to yourself and you write what you love, like that's what's gonna, shine through. And you do that, and people are like, what the hell?
Right. You're like, well, authors are also weird. We are a little bit quirky, right? We're not the sort of average. I mean, I don't think you do this job if you're like somebody. I actually don't think you do this job if you could do any other job. Like I've always thought, that there's something, and this is, I'm speaking not for you, for myself, like just something a little twist of the nut off about the way we look at the world. Because otherwise, like, why not spend, why not go and punch numbers for 8 hours a day and have a solid income and have a big 401k. And I mean, I just don't think it's possible. Like we're looking at the world a little sideways. So for
For
better or
sure.
worse.
Yeah,
Well, so
true.
you're on a one a year. Oh, you got two coming out this year because you're working on a novella.
I'm working on a novella now, but that's not coming out actually. We just were talking about the scheduling this morning. I think spring 2026. So 2 out next year, 1 out this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. And how do you like, so how is it, have you done novellas before? Because it feels like a slightly different beast because they're, it's
I
short.
haven't.
Yeah.
I don't even know. We'll see. Like I just so it's of course it's outlined
Yes,
because
right, of course.
especially for length when it's a different length, just
Yeah.
feeling the weight of that in a different package. And I'm just really this week have started the writing of it. So I don't know really anything about it. I was sort of sought out and commissioned to write it, and it's a new experience. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm excited about it. I think
Yes.
the idea and the weird sort of it kind of has this swampy Louisiana setting and has kind of some voodoo and black magic stuff going on. It's leaning a little bit more horror.
I love that.
Never gore. I'm never going to do blood or gore, but it's leaning in the horror genre. So yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited to kind of try something a little different.
Yeah, and I actually love the fact that when I started in this publishing, my first book came out in 2000, so that's how old I am. But basically, you weren't allowed to really cross lanes. It was like if you were going to write suspense or mysteries or romantics, like you couldn't sort of do. And nowadays, I feel like if we want to do something a little lighter or a little darker or a little horror or a little, humor,
Mhm.
it just feels like so much more fun. And why shouldn't we sort of spread our wings? It's not like we're guaranteeing every reader the same experience every time. We get to sort of try different things. So I think that makes this all the more fun. And
What's funny though, so my agent was talking about like we can move into romance if we want to do 2 books. Maybe we go on the romance side. And I did write like I don't know if you know Hallmark Christmas movies
yeah,
for a while, and so I'm like, well, yeah, let me maybe try in the romance. And so I pitched her like the first 3 chapters and synopsis of something, and she was like, listen, I I feel like, it's leaning like it could be romance and the banter, but I feel like at any moment someone's going to get murdered. There was still somehow this dark
Yeah.
underbelly in the tone that I don't know that I have. Like I don't see it.
Right.
She's, so I don't know if that's
No,
going to,
I
yeah.
tried. I can't write romance. I really just there is like I don't know if it's the sadistic side of me is always like who's gonna die. So it's and I didn't
I
start out
guess you
that
can
way.
sense that, even though I wasn't thinking that way. That's
Yeah.
true. I think once it is hard to move from thriller, maybe horror, to go super light, and I think the thing in thriller is you always get to think about the cliffhanger and the page turning thing. I don't know if I know how to do that in romance. It's such a different.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it has to be sort of more relationship, or you're playing on the sort of like tropes of like, misunderstandings. I don't know. I mean I love a good romance novel, but yeah, I don't think it's in my future to write them. So we'll just stick with what we know, Serafina.
Yeah,
Super important. Can you tell us
exactly.
a tiny bit about the book that book 7, so we know what after we all, inhale, nothing ever happens here, what we have to look forward to?
Yeah, so it takes place sort of like in a little bit of a upscale Connecticut neighborhood on a lake. And it again is three female perspectives. But at the very beginning at the annual Labor Day party, a car explodes in the parking lot. And the woman who just gave her keys to a friend to go grab something was the intended victim.
Sure.
So she spends her time trying to figure out why she would be targeted. And she has a husband who died a couple of years earlier, and she sees him at her child's school play in the back row when she takes a selfie to send a friend. And so it sends her on this, why is she a target? Why is her husband alive? He's supposed to be dead. I was at the funeral, kind of spiral into the intertwining in these two other lives. We find out, of course, it's all connected.
Of
Shock.
course, I love that.
Spoiler alert.
There's a hint of some of that in this one too, which I love. We won't, no spoilers. Killer Women never does spoilers, so you have to read it. Well, that's super exciting, Serafina. I love that there's like a little Serafina style in all of them. I hear the plot idea and I think, oh, that is right. That makes total sense to me that you're doing that in your next book. So like I said, I love this, and I don't know if you're not watching the show and you're listening, you should go and look at the cover of Nothing Ever Happens Here because it's actually really eerie and also beautiful, right? It's the snowy street, and I think I know who that is and where she's going. So
Yeah, I was so happy with where they landed on the cover. It's always exciting when they show it to you and you love it.
covers are kind of my favorite thing because it's like the
Yeah.
one thing you can walk away and show, and you don't have to. You're not really responsible for, so it's lovely. Um,
Yeah.
Well, it was so fun to have you on the show today, Serafina. And everyone, this has been Killer Women. I'm like, what's the name of my show? This has been Killer Women with Serafina Nova Glass and her book, Nothing Ever Happens Here. And we will see you next time. Bye.